Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salai Loma Quidira. The time is 9:34 Central African time. Beautiful morning here in Johannesburg. But we're going to be switching gears now. We'll be going to the UK, focusing on those protests this past weekend, where tens of thousands marched under the banner of Unite the Kingdom, a rally organized by far-right activist Tommy Robinson. What began as a promise of free speech spiraled into confrontations. There was anti-Muslim sentiment and chants. There's violence and serious injuries to police officers, with over 110,000 people estimated to have been in attendance of that rally, protest, whatever you want to call it. But it's been called one of the largest nationalist protests in Britain in decades. Speakers included Elon Musk via video link and French politician Eric Zemmour, who amplified conspiracy theories about immigration and national identity and what they framed as threats to British society. And joining us now to discuss the significance and I think most importantly, the consequences of this march is Basharat Ali, presenter on Islam channel in the UK. And yeah, we'll unpack, the multi-layered, multifaceted nature of this protest. What does it mean for British Muslims and migrants? And how should the country respond when free speech crosses into hate speech, something that we've seen become a reality quite often lately. Basharat, assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah so much for joining us. Really appreciate you giving us your time and looking forward to get a bit more insight on this protest, which I think, all of us across the world were looking at with a bit of concern.
Wa alaikum assalam, Salayo. Thank you very much, Barakallahu Feek. Yeah, it is concerning, but these are challenges we have to deal with.
I think let's jump right into it. What struck you the most about this protest, this march, especially in terms of scale, the nature of its content, and the atmosphere in generally?
Okay, so dealing with the scale, it is one of the largest, perhaps the largest, what they would call right wing. Many people describe it as fascist, racist gathering. Not all people would have attended, you would say, are fascist or racist, but Tommy Robinson, Eric Zemmour, you mentioned your own Elon Musk, a man a man who was born to migrants who went to colonize Africa and then migrated to America, attacks migrants. I mean, the irony was killed by those comments. So effectively, it's not, as they were saying, hundreds of thousands or millions. That's not true. But certainly the police have estimated 100,000 plus, which is the biggest number. Now, in terms of the general attitude, it's anti-migrant, it's anti-Muslim, openly. And so from the perspective of people living in the United Kingdom, the race bait and division and distractions are there. At the end of the day, blaming racism is about as vile as you can get, because attacking metaphorically or literally somebody because of the color of their skin, there is no basis for that. You are a very vile human, whoever you are, whoever the racist is. It could be black to white racism, brown to black, and etc., and white to black. It doesn't matter, because principally it's wrong. So when we look at it from the perspective of the attacks on Islam, you mentioned Eric Zemmour, you mentioned there are other people there. Katie Hopkins was there, another well-known right-wing person in this country, activist, so-called, and Tommy Robinson. So it was a gathering of minds and a gathering of hearts, and we have to deal with it.
How are the Muslim people, the Muslim communities in London reacting to what many see as the public normalization of anti-Muslim rhetoric in events like this one?
Well, look, this didn't come out of a vacuum. We need to just pan out and go back. The mainstream politicians, both Conservative and Labour, have for decades been attacking migration, have been attacking Islam and Muslims. So this is sadly a conclusion, or it's something now which has gone beyond their rhetoric, And of course, when they talk about migrants coming to the UK, look, in principle, all states have the right to regulate who enters their country. This is nothing controversial. But there's nothing more quintessentially British than jumping in a boat and going halfway around the world without a visa. That's not something novel or new. The empire has been doing that for centuries, as have the Europeans. So the idea that you can blame the world's problems on illegal migrants, and by the way, refugees are allowed to enter the country without a visa because you can't apply for a visa. The only refugees who are allowed to come lawfully, there are a number of schemes, the Afghans, but of course Ukrainians, as you remember, Ukrainians, and a lot of them at the time said, we're bringing them in, and many people have questioned why you don't have a similar scheme for people from Gaza, for example. And the answer is straightforward. It's not politically expedient or beneficial to bring lots of brown or Muslim people, or Arab Christians, of course, but we happily accept Ukrainians. And by the way, it's good that Ukrainian refugees were welcomed in this country. That's how refugees should be treated. So the problem is political failure, both at an economic level and also on things such as migration and so on, which is being weaponized by the main parties to effectively scapegoat and deflect from their failure. And that's being now taken up by people like Mr. Nigel Farage. He was organizing this demonstration, but Reform UK is a prominent party that campaigns on the issue of immigration. And of course, Mr. Robinson and his crew are people who are well known. I mean, there was an article in the Times of Israel many years ago where it talked about the fact that, inverted commas, pro-Israel groups were boosting this man as well. It was published, I think, in January 2019. So there are many, it's a confluence of many things.
The discussion around free speech is one that is becoming very, very prominent in the UK at this current moment. The organizers of this march, they themselves claim, it was about free speech. But I think at this point we can all agree that it's hate speech dressed as free speech. Where does one draw the line, especially in a diverse, multi-faith society, when it comes to what you say and how you say, and how is the UK in itself been dealing with this predicament?
Well, look, there is no such thing as free speech. This is a oxymoron, and it's completely wrong. There are dozens of laws that restrict what you can say in this country, and I have no doubt in South Africa and the world over. So it's what speech you're allowed to freely express, if we want to put it that way, because states the world over control. And there's nothing wrong with, in principle, in controlling what people can say. So the idea of a intellectual discussion must always be welcome. Whether you're a Muslim or not, it's irrelevant. And from the Islamic tradition, people question the Prophet ﷺ openly. Bedouin coming out of the desert, the Christians of Najran famously visited him. So as Muslims, from a classical point of view, we don't have a problem with people questioning. Obviously, when people start insulting, swearing, abusing, that is a retrograde sort of behavior. And generally speaking, whilst people do it, it's not something that is positive. So we've had the insults, the anti-migrant sort of rhetoric being amplified. And, when people like Musk talk about freedom of speech and so on, and how X or Twitter has gone under his stewardship, it makes you laugh. So what you have actually is there's nothing to do with free speech. As a Muslim, no Muslim should have any problem with anybody questioning or critiquing Islam. But how else would somebody become a Muslim if they can't ask you questions? But from an Islamic perspective, we have a view that insulting is wrong. And by the way, many people have been convicted in this country for free speech. There was somebody years ago who some Muslim made some crass comments at a 11th of November Poppy Day ceremony. There was somebody who was convicted, a Scottish guy, of making comments about an army officer, I forget his name, who raised lots of funds during COVID when he died. So the idea that you have free speech untrammeled is completely wrong. And very often, unacceptable speech politically is maligned, attacked, and often prosecuted. And also, by the way, regarding Palestine, dozens, maybe hundreds of people have been taken to task through a regulatory framework, doctors, teachers, and so on, for when they've spoken up. So again, this is a red herring and a smokescreen. This is nothing to do with free speech.
Mm, mm, mm. I was following, this march on X, and Tommy Robertson and Eric Zemmour and others spoke of a so-called immigration crisis in the UK, and I know we touched on it, and this conspiracy of a great replacement narrative, which I honestly think is laughable. How dangerous are these kind of narratives, and how do they affect the social cohesion and perception of minorities?
Well, look, as you'll be familiar, last year there was rioting in this country when those girls were murdered horrifically by that boy up in the north of England,
Mm,
when they falsely attributed to Muslims and so on. But one of the most beautiful things was that the local community in that town came out and helped rebuild the mosque, the wall outside the masjid. So by and large, British people generally are fair-minded, and they don't ascribe to these, which are increasingly fringe views. So the idea there's a great replacement theory is complete rubbish because, firstly, Europe is in a population decline. Without migrants, Europe will die and it cannot sustain the economy. This is not the stuff of fiction, it's fact.
mm,
Secondly, unless you happen to be a Celt or Gaelic, the Romans migrated to this country, the Normans did, the Saxons did, the Angles did, the Vikings did. This country is a collection of migrants. It depends where you draw the line. So what they're saying is brown and black migrants are not welcome because Eric Zemmour's French. So he's in England. The irony again is not lost. And when you look at it from the perspective of culture, well, look, the the British Isles, you have Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And there are cultural differences. The Scots want to become independent. Nobody would say that they are not assimilated. They're part of this society. So this great replacement theory is nonsense because the problem why there's a population decline is because people are not having enough children, and that's based upon things like individualism and choice of not wanting to have children. That's nothing to do
mm.
with migrants who have uh, children, however many that might be. So again, this is a complete sort of non-starter. It's just used as a rallying cry because it's fear, isn't it? Look, you're being replaced. Okay, well, how many kids do you have? None. How many kids do your siblings have? Well, one. Okay, so your
Mm.
parents had five, but there's one of you. Do the mathematics. So the problem is about a declining population due to the choice of people not having children. And at the end of the day, most of the migration, illegal migration is a very small percentage. Most of the migration to this country, just for context, after the Second World Wars, because the Europeans spent 50 years killing each other in two wars. They're not world wars, they were European wars over world resources, put them in a proper context.
Mm-hmm.
So people from Africa, the Afro-Caribbean, India, and so on, because of historical roots of empire and colonialism, my grandfather came as an economic migrant to the United Kingdom. He worked, as did my father. So, and we're not a novel story. So migrants are welcomed, invited into this country. And then you've got business migration, so economic migration, which is approved, has been approved successively by governments, both the Conservatives and Labour, and the Liberal and Conservative coalition, which was formed after the Brown government was defeated in the election in 2010, I think it was. So overwhelmingly, the migration is lawful. It is based upon skills, or if you marry somebody from abroad, and students who come here, study, work, get jobs. So again, the debate is not being properly portrayed in a transparent manner so as to create fear. And that fear if you have a government where there's economic failure, so I'll give you an interesting statistic. The public debt of the United Kingdom has gone from approximately 350 billion in the mid 90s when Tony Blair came into power. It's close to 3 trillion. That's a sevenfold or nearly an eightfold increase. 100 billion a year is spent on debt interest. Of course, from an Islamic perspective, we say riba is haram for precisely that reason. There's no economic activity, people are just lending money. But where is that money being spent? Where is it being spent? Corruption, nepotism, incompetence, political failure are the reasons why many people are disgruntled. And you can understand, look, when there's economic difficulty, scapegoating and blaming other people is not novel. It happened during the 1920s and 30s in Europe. It's happened before. And this is where Muslims, you ask what Muslims should do and feel, our role is to speak loud and proud the facts, not get sidetracked into silly debates. And we, as Muslims, live in this country, migrants, there are millions of migrants, they should explain the case to all the people that they come into contact with by way of hard facts and argument. But ultimately, the British government, like the government in America, like the French government, like the Dutch government, like the Hungarian government, and so on, right-wing governments across Europe are stoking the fans of racism and Islamophobia, and that is being now harnessed and taken further by other groups. So it's a competition to outdo each other on effectively a Islamophobic or racist agenda. And just to caveat what I say, if somebody commits a crime and they happen to be a Muslim or a migrant, they're a criminal. You don't need to focus unfairly or dishonestly on their faith or on their race, because that is effectively not being transparent, which is what's required.
No, most definitely. Just lastly, before I let you go, Basharat, looking ahead, could these kinds of rallies reshape political discourse in the UK, and what might be the longer term impact, maybe looking at elections, looking at how policies being drafted, and just generally community relations?
Well, if you look at the last 2 decades, because these sort of things have to be looked at in decades rather than years generally, the general direction of travel in politics across Europe and in North America is now extreme sort of nationalism, colored with patriotism. And so harsher policies are being put out there. So Nigel Farage, who is the leader of Reform UK, is very popular. His party is leading the two main parties in the polls at the moment. So we can see a lurch to the right. There's still 3-4 years to go until the next general election. So I suspect things may not be as bad. But judging by where we have come to programs such as the Prevent program, the anti-terror laws in the UK, the targeting of certainly Islam and Muslim communities, it does not bode well. But Britain has historically been a small C conservative country, and it will take a lot more to push people into the arms of the extreme right. And I'm not saying everybody who protests is a racist. Then everybody will not be, because many people who buy into the narrative may well be attending because they feel this is the only way out, because Starmer has failed, because the Tory party led by Kemi Badenoch, who is not too proud of her African origins, many might say. So the way you look at this is that as Muslims, we're here to stay. As immigrants, we're here to stay. And therefore, we have to ensure that our voice is heard, our arguments are heard. But certainly, in answer to your question, politics has shifted to the right. It has been shifted to the right by the mainstream political parties. And now others are coming in to capitalize on an increasingly anti-migrant, anti-Muslim sentiment, which is worrying and has to be confronted head on. I can't hear you. Sorry, I've lost. I'm struggling. Nope, I can't hear you.
All right, there we go.
I can hear you now. There you,
Okay.
we got you back.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think we're going to video for now. We have run out of time, unfortunately, but I think we're going to be keeping in touch with you just to get the latest out of the UK. I think it's a concerning state of affairs, and one that I can tell you the whole world is looking at with a very, very keen eye. But we're going to video for now. Jazakallah so much.
Barakallahu. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum to you.
Walaikum salam. That was Basharat Ali. Yeah, man. I think concerning. Hey, what we saw in London, at least for me, isn't just about, one rally or one protest or whatever happened happening. I think it reflects deeper anxieties, divisions, and challenges within the UK, something that is quite similar to what we're experiencing currently here in South Africa. As Bashar was speaking there, at some point you'd think it was a copy and paste kind of scenario with what's happening here in South Africa. Unemployment is at an all-time high. The government is not giving people services. The youth is unemployed. Infrastructure is falling apart. And the next best thing South Africans are doing right now is blaming migrants from the rest of the continent that have come to South Africa and have made a home. Granted, we can't run away from the fact that we have porous borders, and sometimes you have people that have unpalatable intentions making their way to the country. Some of them, committing very, very heinous crimes here in South Africa. But for the most part, let's say, for instance, every household here in South Africa, everyone had a job. You could access public clinics and public hospitals without hassle. You could be taken care of. Our public schools were well funded, well equipped, having the best education that we can offer to our kids. The infrastructure in our cities was not dilapidating. Crime was curbed to the absolute minimum. Would we be seeing organizations like Operation Tudula, March and March, and many like them popping up and us saying, we can even push it as far as being political parties? So ultimately, it boils to government and its failures. Its failures in service delivery, and its failures when it comes to growing the economy and making sure that everyone has a job and is earning well, and kids go to good schools, and people are offered good healthcare, and we're not competing for little to non-existing services that the government should be rendering. So yeah, I think it's very, very crucial to watch how the authorities in London respond to this, how mainstream media frames this, and how communities themselves in the UK engage. Because when words turn into chants and chants into actions, the consequences are real. I mean, you just have to look everywhere else in the world. Whether it's multiple genocides that we've seen across the African continent, the Houthis and the Tutsis, and how that started as just a conversation and reckless things being said, and reckless songs being sang, and ultimately million people losing their lives. The consequences could be real and the consequences could be dire. So yeah, very, very important story to look out for, and we'll be definitely be keeping a keen and close eye when it comes to the developments out in the UK. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues.